Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. We're continuing on with the season preview series. Today we will be focusing on the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, for those of you who haven't seen one of these episodes before, I will be breaking down my projected offensive and defensive starters. Of course, we do have about a week until training camps open and pre-season, so expect these to potentially change. But if the team were to play a game tomorrow, this is how I suspect they would line up. I will then be going through my projected record for the team, going through the schedule a little bit, and then giving my X factors for the season. The three key areas that I think will have the most impact on how this team ends up. And let's get into it with the projected offensive starters. Of course, at quarterback, we're going to be seeing Carson Wentz entering his second season. Of course, last year started the season incredibly well, looked after the football, made good decisions, kept the team in games. As the season wore on, the offense struggled around him. Things started to look iffy toward the end of the year. I saw enough in those early games to think that this guy could have a very successful year too, particularly with the upgrades that have been made. Clearly the unquestioned starter, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how he develops. Running back, they signed LeGarrette Blount. He will be the starter, the workhorse, and certainly the goal line back, as we've seen, very effective in that role. I think rookie Donnell Pumphrey ends up being the change of pace back. Blount does not offer much in the pass game, and he's also not a particularly effective big play threat. He'll grind in the middle, but you need someone else to spell him, and I think Pumphrey ends up taking that role. At wide receiver, full revamp of this starting group that struggled a year ago. Alshon Jeffrey comes in as the number one, of course on a 1-year deal, so he's going to be fully motivated, you'd have to think, to get a big payday next season and possible long-term deal, whether it's in Philly or elsewhere. He's on the kind of low end of those physical receivers. There's guys like Des Bryant, Mike Evans, Julio, more talented than Jeffrey, but Jeffrey's a perfectly serviceable number one. I expect a big season from him. Torrey Smith is out of the wasteland that was San Francisco for the last few years. I think he can recapture his form that he showed in Baltimore, especially with the other guys around him. I think he can certainly contribute. I don't think he's lost it. I blame San Fran for a lot of those issues. And Jordan Matthews, who I think is also a decent receiver. He was their number one effectively last year. But operating in the slot role, or possibly just having him and Torrey Smith move around the formation, it looks like a good trio. So I expect a lot more productivity from this group this season. At tight end, Zach Ertz and Brent Selleck. This is a good pair. Zach Ertz doesn't get talked about too much, but he's a very good receiver. He also contributes a little bit in the run game. And Selleck, he's been around a while. He's a savvy player, and he can certainly step up if anything does happen to Ertz. They can play a two tight end set effectively with those two. Ertz a bit more of a field stretcher than Selleck is. Offensive tackle, one of the best pairs in football. Jason Peters just keeps on going. One of the best pass protectors in the league. A very effective run blocker. In all honesty, I don't think this gets talked about too much, but I think this guy's very quietly had a Hall of Fame caliber career. Lane Johnson's possibly the best bookend tackle in the league. We saw how much his team missed him when he was suspended last year. As long as none of those issues pop up, they expect this pair to be dominant. At guard, Alan Barber and Brandon Brooks. Not big names, but they were effective last year. The Eagles' offensive line was very, very good. These guys, they've got a bit more to block for this year. I think the run game should be very productive. I think they're good blockers in that regard. And centre Jason Kelce had a bit of a down season, but the group around him played very well. I think he can pull it back. I don't know if he was playing through an injury, but this is a very talented group. And at kicker, Caleb Sturgis. This offense is definitely improved. We saw last year that passing game, the skill positions were lacking. I'm not a huge fan of the backfield in terms of Blount and Pumphrey, but I think they'll be able to do enough, particularly with the production they'll get from the offensive line. But I think this receiving group has potential to be very dangerous. Now, a lot of this will come down to how quickly the group gels. If that happens, the Eagles could be a very productive unit, I think. There's a lot of depth and quality in that receiving group now. Who knows, maybe even Nelson Aguilar will turn up and make some plays this year. I'm dubious, but you never know. Of course, with a second-year quarterback, a lot of it comes down to Wentz. But if he can clean up some of the bad habits that he did pick up, and I think they were somewhat overblown, but they were certainly present. There's a reason people were mentioning them toward the end of last year. If he can clean those up, I think this could be a very, very productive offense heading into 2017. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, man, I'm a big fan of this defensive line. I think Derek Barnett ends up starting. I, throughout the draft process, said I think Barnett can step in day one and contribute. Not the easiest position to play as a rookie, but I think he'll, maybe give this team 6 or 7 sacks and play the run reasonably well. Brandon Graham, one of the most underrated players in the league. The sack numbers are never there, but he offers stellar run play and gets a ton of heat on quarterbacks, even if as I say, the sacks don't necessarily turn up. But yeah, heck of a player. They've got some depth behind those guys as well. At defensive tackle, Fletcher Cox, one of the best defensive tackles in all of football, and Timmy Jernigan, who had flashes whilst he was in Baltimore. As a Florida State guy, I saw him in college. The talent is no doubt there, and we did see it in part. Just needs to develop more consistency. I think playing alongside a guy like Fletcher Cox will help. He's certainly going to have a bit more freedom than he perhaps had in Baltimore's scheme, and I think on a 1-year deal before free agency, he's going to be motivated. I think him and Cox could end up being a stellar pairing. And Fletcher Cox, the guy just does it all at this point. Great player. The linebacker spot, I think this is up in the air for me. I think we'll see Michael Kendricks, whilst he may not be a great fit in the 4-3. I do think he'll see some play, maybe be used as a designated blitzer at times. And I think Nigel Bradham, formerly of the Bills, will play on the outside. And I think we'll see Jordan Hicks in the middle. I think that one I feel good about. The outside backer position, not so much. Wouldn't be surprised to see this group rejigged. I do think these spots are certainly open. And not had great production from the linebacker spot over the last few years. So, yeah, consider these spots pretty open for potential rookies or other guys to get a chance. At corner, this is where things start to slide a little bit. Patrick Robinson, who's been a bust thus far. Jalen Mills, and I've got Dwayne Gratz. It's a very iffy looking group. I personally wouldn't feel great about any of them starting on most teams. Robinson's got talent, but it's just never come together. Even Dwayne Gratz, actually. But there's a degree of experience there, but they're all underperforming players. Mills not really seen a huge amount of. This is a big question mark for this team. Certainly, I think a position that could look very different come the start of the season. Can't imagine any of these spots are locked down. Then at safety, Malcolm Jenkins, who has somewhat behind the scenes become a real top flight safety. Very good player. Him and Rodney McLeod form a decent pair of safeties behind that slightly iffy group of corners. I am a big fan of the look of this defence, partly because I love that front four. I really do think they're going to be able to bring the heat and keep this defence playing at least a middle of the pack level, at least just on the strength of them alone. If the positions behind them where I think things are a bit more sketchy, then if anything come together there, I think they can be a very, very good group. As I say, Fletcher Cox is a monster. Him and Graham, you've got two talented players in Jernigan and Barnett, who you may not know what you're going to get from this season. They'll certainly have opportunities in one-on-one situations to impress. I think this unit's going to be very, very effective against the run. I just think that with Jernigan there, if he can play discipline, they're going to be tough to run on. The passing game, bit more of an issue, because when that rush doesn't get there, I do worry about this secondary, but it'll be fun to see how it turns out. It's a bit of a mishmash group. And Donnie Jones, punter. Often nearly forget the punters. So in terms of next season, last year, of course, the team got off to a hot start, ended up faltering, finishing 7-9. I think this year they play a far more consistent brand of football and end up sneaking into the playoffs at 10-6. Whether that wins the division, I don't know. But I think them and the Cowboys end up tied at 10-6 personally. Sneak preview of my predictions there, although I've already done the Cowboys, so maybe not so much. But yeah, I think this team competes for a wild card spot and possibly the division. The NFC East is so hard to call, but you know, the games within the division, of course, are going to be absolutely huge for this team. It's certainly going to be a lot of fun to watch. That division's always nuts. We get Giants and Eagles games where who knows what's going to happen. In terms of the other divisions they're playing against, we've got the West. Yeah, both the West divisions. This is one of the reasons I've got the NFC East teams losing a fair few this year. It's just the AFC West teams are tough. I think if you can go 3-1 against them, you're doing well. I think they're going to beat up on each other. In the NFC West, a bit softer, of course. The Seahawks, the only team that jumps out as a massive threat. Who knows what the Cardinals will look like. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tough slog in that NFC East, but I do think it's anyone's game. And we'll see how this team gets on. I think the end of the season, when they get that big rash of divisional games, is going to be absolutely critical. In terms of the 3 key areas for this team to be contending for the playoffs or potentially fall apart, start with the most obvious, the corner position. I mean, the receiving groups in this division are pretty good. You know, Cowboys have Des Bryant, you've got Odell Beckham and Brandon Marshall, you've got Terrell Pryor. And these teams have depth at that position as well. Guys like Sterling Shepard, you've got Cole Beasley. They've all got a lot of options. You've got Jordan Reed as well, tight ends. It's going to be a real issue for this team if the pass rush doesn't deliver like we expect, and if at least one of these corners is going to have to step up, hopefully for this team too, they're going to have to get some production from somewhere. Otherwise, I just can't see them coming out of that division successful. The new receivers, as I mentioned earlier, I like the talent there, but it is, you know, you've got 2 new starters and an inexperienced quarterback. That's going to have to come together quickly. I don't think the run game is going to be good enough to overpower teams and win games on its own. So these guys are going to have to figure things out. As I say, I think this schedule is somewhat unforgiving, and it's going to be a tough division. So they're going to have to get it together in the first month and keep it going all year. The defensive line, for this defense to be successful, this line has to play up to the level that I'm expecting from it, and I'm sure a lot of other people are. On paper, they look fantastic. There's no real holes there. There's some depth as well. They look like they can play the run and the pass effectively. It's one of the things I liked about Barnett coming out. So if they can cover up the issues in the back 7, of which I think there are several, then I think this team can be very, very good. If they don't, then this defence could be a bit of a disaster zone. And as much as I think the offence is going to be pretty good, I don't think it's going to be capable of winning shootouts on a weekly basis. So this D-line absolutely has to perform. So there you have it. That's your 2017 Eagles preview. I'm somewhat high on this team, especially for a team that's got a real lack of corners. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's just that D-line, and I did see enough out of Wentz that I like, and I really like the offensive line. So I think this team has some of the pieces to go distance. There are some question marks. We'll see how they end up. And let me know, what do you guys think? Do you feel confident about this year's version of the Eagles? What do you think on the NFC East? As I say, I think it's probably the toughest division to call heading into the season. AFC West is going to be tough. It's going to be a lot of fun seeing how things play out there. And any players I haven't mentioned that you think I should be keeping an eye on, let me know. We've got the comment section below, the Cover Zero Facebook page. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. Always happy to talk football. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, check out some more. Covered a large chunk of the league now at this point. We're a few weeks in. Already done the Cowboys from this division. Tomorrow, going to be going through the top 10 corners in the NFL along with my weekly review, and there's actually been some news this week, so that episode will be a lot bit better than they have been in terms of the news segment. So check those out, and as always, if you could like, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon, it would be greatly appreciated. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really do appreciate people checking the show out. Have a great evening, and go Bucks.